Hey everyone, welcome to Dirk Island. This is the weekend show where we talk about documentaries. On this episode, we're talking about Ask Dr. Ruth. It's a new documentary on Hulu that's about Dr. Ruth Westheimer, and she is a Holocaust survivor and sex coach, almost like a sex coach grandma who got really famous in the 80s but is still around today. And it's just about her life story and all of the little elements that will make you essentially fall in love with her. And anyway, it's a very effective documentary. As you said, this documentary made me fall in love with Dr. Ruth. I mean, it's hard not to like someone who has her story. She grew up in the Holocaust, and her parents shipped her off to an orphanage in Switzerland where she lived, and we later learned her parents died in the Holocaust. And she grows up to become one of the most prominent doctor and people who is helping give sex advice at a time where she was really pushing things forward, both with women, with reproductive rights, and just generally kind of liberalizing and opening up a dialogue about sexual health in a way that at the time she was rising to prominence, people were a little bit orthodox and a little bit closed off and not wanting to talk about sex. Ultimately, she helped improve the dialogue in probably a lot of people's lives. She's impressively smart and strong. Her stature, she's got this thick German accent. She's small, but she walks around and she just seems kind of like she's got a lot of chutzpah and energy. And it's just kind of like, what an awesome way to be, having been the kind of victim and have her life influenced so much by persecution, and coming out instead of having some, hardened or negative viewpoint or perspective on life. She's like deeply compassionate and open-minded. So this documentary is so much of why I like documentaries, and it's that she does not overlap with my knowledge of the world. I knew of Dr. Drew back in the days of Loveline, but he is out of her, like he's a post her, and that's even very old. I mean, she was at her height of her fame before I was really aware of any of who she was, and this documentary gave me an entire in a less than 2 hours. You basically you fall in love with her. She is like so likable. The story is so rich. There is so much not about any specific advice, sex advice. It's more about a career and about a person's life. A profile in a life that I think the message here that I really liked, which is different often than some other character profiles or accomplishment profiles, like, for example, Free Solo that just won, that is about like the greatest athletic achievement of all time, possibly, at least in a certain category, and about a person who's really fun because of how unique they are. To see at the center of that, a character profile of that person, what it takes, but that is about accomplishment at the highest level, which is often what character documentaries are about. This one is so different in that it shows you a life that is so lovable, and it's made up of 1,000 and more mini contributions to individuals. And what I mean by that is there are moments that make you really love her so much because you can tell she's talking to the camera people. She's like, "Did you eat? I got this for you guys." There's a little montage at the end of the film of her being this, "Oh, did you get food?" It's like hilarious, but it's also just you can tell that she cares about the dignity of each person, that her contribution to all of humanity is done on a daily, minute-by-minute basis, whether it's through her actual professional capacity of taking phone calls and whatever, but the model that she sets out there for giving individuals advice, for being a nice person to individuals on a daily basis. And I think that is a much forgettable lesson, that a great life can consist of a great accomplishment or 1,000 little
niceties. And 1,000 little niceties that are done on a daily basis make up such a beautiful compilation, which is what I feel like she is, and that's the thing that I really love. I mean, the significant events, the Holocaust loss. I mean, it's a very compelling documentary to watch. But the reason that you love her is and the reason that she matters and is such a great model in a way is not because of any specific thing. It's because of just so many little things, and how it's a lesson that you need to keep learning. It's why the character profiles and why being exposing yourself to people that you didn't necessarily cross over with in your life, like a Dr. Ruth for me, is very important, and why I just love this genre so much, because it allows this, and people are going out and making these, and it just adds to the complexion. And sometimes the complexion you need is, it's not like you need to learn a lesson once. It's like you need to be reminded of a lesson over and over again in your life, so that you can be reminded that it's important, so that you don't get distracted by, oh no, a singular focus on a singular accomplishment is important. It actually is important how you treat everyone every day. And whether it's a little bit of advice, whether it's in a professional capacity, whether it's not, she really is a great model of that. So I just loved it. I loved watching her for that reason.
I loved how nice she was to each individual and how she cared about the dignity, but then also she's got a little bit of a sharpness to her wit too, in a totally non-cruel way. She says it twice in the documentary. She goes, "What a stupid question." Yeah. Like, where she's telling a story about, which is kind of an interesting, she has this lack of judgment and this open-mindedness about sexuality that even made me feel a little bit like a Puritan. I mean, she tells her losing her virginity story, I believe in Israel on a farm, and she's kind of dating, as she says, it's a hugs and kisses boyfriend, this guy, and then the younger brother, who's a soldier, comes to visit them for a weekend or something, and the younger brother's like, ooh, there's an immediate attraction for her, and she ends up going off with him, and the interviewer goes, oh, you mean you were dating his brother? And she goes, what a stupid question. Just like, kind of like, don't ask me that, which is funny that she has this, like, she's not a pushover, and she's not Pollyanna, she's not, she clearly has a sharp wit and would talk back, but she also has this like deep compassion and non-judgmentalness. A similar thing I kind of noticed is she had 3 marriages. She kind of talks and openly admits, like, the first 2 were just legalized love affairs. The third one was the real deal, and she just has this frankness and non-judgmentalness about. She's not puritanical, has no she's not caught up on explaining herself about having multiple marriages. She just is like honest and seems to just have lived her life presently as she did. And even with her second husband, she's like, I came to America with him. So she had her first husband, divorced, gets married again, and with that one moves to the U.S. and then says, oh, I spent one night with him in a hotel room and realized this would never work. Like, he's not an intellectual. I'm an intellectual. And there's a part of me that's like the puritanical parts, like, you can't just like make those mistakes with marriages and then move on. And she's just like not caught up with that. She just is like this person who clearly just moves forward in life. And I kind of respect that, because she seems like she's not caught up in the past or her own thoughts or imperfection, even being a relationship advice person who's had 3 marriages. Yeah. She's like, doesn't seem to just be neurotic or caught up on any of that shit, which I liked. And as a older woman from a generation before me, to be almost more liberal and open-minded about these topics is a little bit striking, like sets me back.
Yeah, I think it brings up a really interesting tension that I believe it's granddaughters try to bring up with her at some point in time in the documentary, and they're trying to challenge her and be like, you're a feminist. Grandma, you're a feminist. She's like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. She does not want to say that she's a feminist. And I think it's really funny, because I think that she does these things in the documentary, which her grandchildren basically try to objectively prove to her that she's a feminist. Like, you believe women should be equally paid? Oh, yes, of course. And then, and then there's other things in her story too. Like, she was fighting, in the military. She was what was the other one? She lived as a single mom when she's like, yeah, I did it. I mean, no one was really doing it at the time, but I was a single mom, and I didn't have any money, but we made do, and I would have people over, and all I had to do was provide chips and the living space, and people would have fun, and I had a great life. And she has such a powerful character, which is. It's funny how a trailblazer in that way is made, because you wonder a bit. So I guess I'm deviating a bit from the feminism versus non-feminism point, but how she's made. She definitely became this almost. She is an iconic female figure in the lack of giving a fuck about certain topics. Her openness about sexuality, female orgasms, all of this, the genre that she gets into, with challenging a lot of the people that she's who want to either have sexuality in a box or want to think very regular things about sexuality that she wants to keep pushing back on. And so she has these elements of her story, but I feel like the reason, at least this is what came through to me, she is a romantic. She is so, like the story with she's trying to tell about losing her virginity on top of a hay bale with this guy who she thought was hot, and she wants to tell it like a romance novel to the director, and the director wants to ask if there's some sort of infidelity scandal or something like that, and she's like, this is a romance novel, okay? Like, I love. She's just like, she is, she has this basically element to her, which is a true love of romance and the male-female interaction, or any sort of interaction, the romantic interaction. For her, it's male-female, but any sort of interaction that is sexual or love and sex or whatever. But she's very much comes off as almost an old school romantic, and yet still talks so, well, you could say, progressively about sex and women and sex and all this kind of stuff. So it's a big contrast if your worldview is you must be one or the other. And I think for her, that's maybe one of the reasons why feminism doesn't have the right taste to her, because it doesn't have maybe at least in a connotation scenario, the romanticism seems kind of lost sometimes, or at least there can be a perceived tension. That tension might not actually be real, as a lot of people would probably say, but there's maybe a perception of that, and she's obviously from an older generation too. But I think it's really interesting to watch, because she is definitely a personality of a certain style. She is expressly apolitical, although she doesn't care who you sleep with, doesn't care your sexual orientation, doesn't want to take away the right for people to choose whether or not to have an abortion.
It's interesting that you bring up that she isn't really political, because when you watch the documentary, which is another reason that makes you just love her, is just by being her, she is so much more open-minded than people seem to be at the time, especially during the AIDS controversy. She's open-minded, and people even say, at the time when she's on with a gay radio host, and he's like, at the time, I just hadn't heard anyone normalize my experience. And it goes beyond orientation. There's just a lot of people now we know, have different sexual preferences. They're as different as our bodies are different. And for her, you can just get this feeling that there's so many people she just was life-giving to, who are I had no outlet to hear anything that made me feel anything but a freak, and then I hear Dr. Ruth, who's this intelligent person, just speaking plainly about the differences. And as she says, one of her least favorite words in the English language is normal, which is so great. And so she does so much for that. She does so much for women. One of the most cringy moments, I want to say I love it and it's progressive, but she goes, I don't know about this term, blue balls, for blue balls, for a guy, not getting to climax in an experience, which is so funny, because she's like, wait, that happens way more for women, and I've got this new term, blue lips, which is horribly cringy, but still, it's a funny little clip they show. That's an anecdote to she did a lot for different groups just by being herself and and not trying to be overtly political.
Shifting paradigms by just kind of what she says and who she is. Yeah. Okay. So let's get on to favorite moments. I think I have two. One is a message that I love to see. It's always surprising to me how the world works this way, but basically her story of becoming famous is she was into her 50s at the time, I believe. It was she's not a Holocaust, she doesn't call herself a Holocaust survivor, but a Holocaust orphan. She was 10 when her parents were taken away. And so not until 1981 does she get a chance to be on a radio show to give basically public PSA type advice for people on sex education, basically. And the show is so raw that it becomes this cult classic overnight almost. But it's interesting because you find it, and I'm always fascinated by this story, which is that some people, when they get the mic, they're ready. And you wonder how they got there. And it's just fascinating to me because when she got the mic, she was already Dr. Ruth. She had the knowledge, she had the personality, she had the story, she had the X factor that really matters to kind of interact and do it, and she had just all these qualities it's really interesting to me to see that in a documentary. So that was one of my favorite moments because I always it's just a fascinating thing about the world that some people, when they get the spotlight, they shine and it seems like it's out of nowhere. The other thing that I think is one of the really fascinating moments for me is when her daughter says basically that the only time she's ever seen Dr. Ruth cry is when her husband died, when Dr. Ruth's husband died, of her long-term husband. And that's really interesting to me. It's just a thing that I think I'm going to think about more after watching this. And I still have been trying to ponder what does that mean? Because I don't have that problem, but I know a lot of people who do, and it comes from a different place. And for her especially, I mean, a woman who is so candid and so open to not cry I wonder what that means. Obviously, she's had an extremely tough life. She basically was an orphan or sent to Switzerland during the Holocaust by her parents so that she would basically be spared. She was sending letters to them weekly until the letters were stopped, and then she never heard from them again. And they were killed in the Holocaust. And then she went off to Israel before it really even was a country and almost had her legs blown off. She encountered so much difficulty and trauma. There's more to the story than even that. It's worth watching just for that reason, to see more of her story. But how a person becomes the person that we all benefit from is very difficult to kind of wrap your head around, because no one would wish this type of trauma on anybody. And obviously this type of trauma is so negative to so many people. The experience of her life experience is so horrific, and it seems to have, there are certain things that she basically acknowledges you can't even talk about with a spouse. You can't talk about with anyone. There's just no outlet, and you must the wound is so great that the only healing is basically a permanent scar, and it's just going to look like a scar, and there is no really healing beyond that point. You're just scarred from it for life, and it changes you in all sorts of ways. And I wonder, sometimes people are almost like delivered to us with so much, you get the type of trauma that she had, no one would wish on anyone. And it's difficult because I think it's inspiring that she did so much with it, but it's interesting because it makes me wonder how much did she have to lose emotionally to be so unafraid of being a single mother early on, or getting all the education that she got, and having the multiple husbands, having the life story that she had, going out and kind of breaking people's assumptions of things. She was delivered a particular hand that was very difficult, and it gave her perhaps a particular set of immunities that the average person, or at least not as much vulnerability to, that the average person just cannot deal with. And And when you develop that kind of that thick skin, or even more than a thick skin, really in her case, what people do with that is really interesting. It's just a fascinating, endlessly fascinating for me.
She's famous for her show, being Dr. Ruth, being the radio personality, and her life outside of that is so striking. I mean, it's a lot of what you said, but just her childhood, being orphaned by the Holocaust, going to Israel, fighting even more, and then her life and family that she created, like how full of a family she has, how deep of connections you can see she even has with her grandchildren, just everything, all the resilience she had based on her earlier life, and just the robustness of her family connections outside of Dr. Ruth, which is the reason this documentary was made, was really impactful and striking, and kind of why this was a great reason for making this, because there's so much that's awesome about her besides just the Dr. Ruth personality.
Without further ado, I would say I give this a 9. This is an extremely high rating, and 9 really means it's out of 10. 9 means that even if you don't love documentaries, I might recommend that you go out and see this or go watch this. This documentary for me it's about a really interesting character profile. It's super well done. She has so much more to her story than the Holocaust survivor, than the sex advice columnist that she's famous for. There's so many more elements to it. She's a romantic. There's much more to her story, and the reason that I think it matters so much, and that I'm almost wondering, I mean, we see some really great documentaries every year, and sometimes the ones that win the Oscar are the grandest, you know. A lot of times that's the ones that win. But I could see this documentary being transcending the normal everyday culture. I don't know if it will, but it might get a bit wider circulated, just because the message that she really means to me, or what it reminds me, is such an important message, which is that the meaning, the importance of your life, the worthiness, the reason that you fall in love with her is not because of any one incredible accomplishment, but because of how she acts every day, all the time, and all the little accomplishment, or all the little nice things that she does. The little advice for the person who's down and out or thinks they are strange, even if they do something that's very not like a lot of other people. So what? You know, the way that she treats the camera crew, the way that she's just so caring and considerate of so many people, and it really comes through in this, and it's a reminder that a beautiful life does not have to be a single great accomplishment or a pursuit of a single great accomplishment. It can be a life full of so many great little moments, and that is what's communicated through this, and I think it's as valuable as anything else as far as a character profile that I've seen, and I just really loved it. I just really had such a great time watching it, so I think it's definitely worth watching. I'd give it a 9.
Okay, I give it an 8. Yes, worth watching it. Not as a knock to your 9. I loved this so much. It's really well made, really surprisingly interesting, and Dr. Ruth is someone, or Grandma Freud as she was called, which I love, is you just fall in love with her. She's a beautiful person in so many ways. Inspiring. Her resilience is inspiring, just the way she lived her life, and there's so much good stuff to dive into beyond the persona of Dr. Ruth, which is the reason she's famous and why this is being made. I guess the only reason I'd give it an 8 instead of a 9 is, you know, this isn't a topic or person who's totally globally relevant, but I will say to her credit, it does cover sexuality, and the Holocaust is part of her life, the creation of Israel is a part of her life, but then on the topic of sexuality, it does dive into kind of, you know, I think we do have a puritanical streak, surprisingly, in liberal modern America. There is like a puritanicalness, and we're still fighting, you know, abortion is still under attack. And you've got Dr. Ruth, this person who's kind of been a liberalizing, open-minded force in the conversation on sex for many years. So that is, they're certainly not to knock the cultural relevance. She's just maybe not, one of the biggest figures of history, which is why I'd give it an 8 instead of a 9. But, you're not going to be disappointed. It's a very good documentary.
Yes, I agree. I mean, we both really, really enjoyed it, and we're just splitting hairs at this point. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please, if you like this, subscribe here on YouTube, and go watch Ask Dr. Ruth. And if you also want to keep up with us, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Thanks very much for watching.
Thanks.